From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
From the Bloomberg studios at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
It's day 2 of the convention, turning the page from Joe Biden to former President Barack Obama, the headliner for tonight, who will make the case for Vice President Kamala Harris.
Other speakers will include former First Lady Michelle Obama and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff. We'll talk with 2 Democratic lawmakers who will be in the room tonight, Haley Stevens of Michigan and Glenn Ivey of Maryland.
And we'll sit down with White House economist Heather Boushey here in her personal capacity and former Education Secretary Arne Duncan this hour. So it is night 2. Joe, of course, last night was a goodbye of sorts, if you will, for the incumbent president, Joe Biden, who has now left town. Kamala Harris actually has left town as well, getting ready for a rally in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as other speakers get ready to speak at the United Center just blocks away from where we are.
This could be an interesting dual city kind of coverage that we're doing tonight with the Kamala Harris and her running mate, as you mentioned, out of town in the same room that Donald Trump accepted the nomination for the Republican Party in Milwaukee. But we're learning a lot more about the list this evening. It's starting to come to form with former First Lady Michelle Obama. A late addition that should get the room on its feet.
Yeah, of course, you have other senators as well, like Bernie Sanders, who will be speaking. The Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is too. The question is going to be, do things run a little bit more on schedule tonight, or are we going to bleed into the midnight hour, East Coast time again? So let's take a look at how things are shaping up on the convention floor now and head to the United Center, where Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is. Tyler, how's it feeling there tonight?
Yeah, hey, Kaylee, I'm here on the arena floor for the second night of the Democratic National Convention. We're going to walk around here so that you can get a sense of the energy in the room tonight. I have to say it is far busier tonight than it was at this time yesterday during this hour. We know that the DNC did urge people to get through those security lines as soon as they could after those delays that you alluded to before really delayed the programming. But everybody in here is lining up, trying to get a seat for that headliner tonight. Of course, former President Barack Obama. We are expecting him to tout Democrats and the Biden administration's progress while also trying to sell to voters what this new Democratic ticket can bring to them. For a sense of what that messaging might sound like, I want you to take a listen here to President Biden last night here addressing the convention and how he thread that needle.
Selecting Kamala was the very first decision I made when I became our nominee. And it was the best decision I made my whole career. They'll continue to lead America forward, creating more jobs, standing up for workers, growing the economy.
Now, this arena right now is divided into sections by states. The delegates sit by the states. We're seeing a lot of signs that say Harris-Walz for Illinois, for example. We're in the middle of the Illinois section right now. But for what it's worth, Vice President Kamala Harris, along with her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, will not be here at the convention tonight. We know that they're actually holding a rally in Milwaukee at the Pfizer Forum, where the Republican National Convention was held last month. But we do expect them to have some battleground representation here tonight. We are expecting Michigan Senator Gary Peters to be here. It also, Joe and Kaylee, might be alluding to some down-ballot impacts that they're hoping to have come November. Of course, Senator Peters runs the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee.
With us from the floor of the Democratic National Convention, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, keeping it local here in the Illinois delegation. Tyler, thank you. We'll talk to you a little bit later on. President Biden addressing the economic progress the U.S. has seen under his administration during his speech last night.
We've gone from economic crisis to the strongest economy in the entire world. Record 16 million new jobs. Record small business growth. Record high stock market, record high 401ks, wages up, and inflation down, way down, and continuing to go down. The smallest racial wealth gap in 20 years. And yes, we both know we have more to do, but we're moving in the right direction.
Let's turn now to Heather Boushey, a voice you recognize here on Bloomberg TV and radio, an economic advisor, of course, to the president, who, to be clear, is speaking with us here at the DNC in Chicago in her personal capacity, not speaking for the White House or the administration. Heather, it's great to see you in Chicago.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
What will be the state of this economy with the amazing amount of data that we've seen, this turn more recently, or interest rate cut expected next month? What will be the state of the economy when the next president takes office?
I think the state will be pretty good. We have seen this really historic and robust economic recovery, as the president talked about last night. You know, coming out of the pandemic, we saw the unemployment rate come down. We've seen jobs be added month after month, almost 16 million jobs added since the president and the vice president took office. We have seen, 3 years of record small business startups across America. We've seen record numbers of Hispanic and Black-owned businesses started up. We've actually seen wages now rising for 17 months for production and non-supervisory workers, the 80% of the workforce that are not managers or not professionals in the economy. So they are going to, whoever the president will inherit an economy that is really at that cruising altitude. You know, we keep talking about a soft landing, but this economy just keeps humming along and has been quite robust. At the same time, one of the really important things will be that because of the president's Invest in America agenda, we've seen investments all across the economy that are starting to take fruit. We've seen historic amounts of investment in the construction of new manufacturing facilities all across the country. That's been going on for 6 quarters now at a historic level. And that is taking shape in communities all across the country. I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of communities over the past year and a half, and seeing where jobs are being created and what those economies look like. That kind of, bringing communities along, that is what this next president, the kind of economy that they're going to inherit.
Well, that's the economy they inherit. Then it becomes a question of the kind of economy they could potentially create with their policies. We've heard outlines now, at least broad strokes, from both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, both of which, different components, have been criticized by some economists, including the likes of Jason Furman, who I'm sure you're familiar with, Heather, as potentially being inflationary, either because they're going to add to the deficit and that could cause it, or because they could spur more demand. Is that a fair criticism of both Donald Trump and Harris's outlines here?
Well, I think that what is very clear is that what little economic policies the Trump administration has put forward really do seem targeted at giving money back to the wealthiest and increasing expenses for the middle class. I mean, you look at the Project 2025, and there's a lot of concerns about what happens to Medicare, to Social Security. You look at his proposals on taxes, and they're not going to be good for the middle class. And outside modelers have forecast that it could likely lead to a recession. And then you look at the kinds of proposals that Vice President Harris has put forward, and she's focused on making sure that the kinds of costs-facing families, that we can do more, that she can do more to bring those down.
And it is going after price gouging corporations, this vague idea, really a way to do that? Because Donald Trump is criticizing that as communist.
Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of states that actually have laws against price gouging. I mean, including the state of Texas. And in fact, what the vice president has put forward is to make sure that, corporations that are acting in bad faith are held accountable, and they can't overcharge consumers. And in fact, her proposal looks very similar to what Republicans in the Senate have proposed in a variety of industries. So this is about, making sure that markets are fair and competitive, and they are working for working people and consumers all across the country.
Well, the reaction from the food industry was pretty remarkable, pretty stern, following her proposal for a federal ban on price gouging. The National Grocers Association says, quote, "The proposal calling for a ban on grocery price gouging is a solution in search of a problem," saying that their members are also being impacted by inflation, victims of inflation. Is there not some truth to that?
Well, I mean, let's start with the facts, right? We know that over the past year, grocery prices have actually come down, right? They're now just 1.1% over the past year, and that's down from a high of over 13% in 2022, in the summer of 2022. So there has been, an easing of inflation in grocery prices, and that's certainly a good thing. But we also know that groceries and grocery stores have been highly concentrated in recent decades, and making sure that those markets work, that they are fair and competitive, that is an important piece of the puzzle. And let's remember, we've all lived through this historic pandemic, right? And one of the things that we learned from that is that policymakers have to pay attention to what's happening in supply chains. And sometimes things get out of whack. And so making sure that companies are not engaging in bad faith actions, that they are not engaging in price gouging. Again, that's something that states have long had laws on, and it's something that she's making sure that she could do at the federal level.
As you talk here about supply, we of course hear frequently from the Fed that there's not much they can do about that. What they can impact through interest rate mechanisms and the like is demand, and they're trying to get that into better balance. Given everything you just said about how costs have come down at the grocery store and in other places, the conversation that everyone is having on Wall Street is the time is now. Demand and supply are in balance. It's time to cut rates. So since you are here in your personal capacity, what is your personal opinion as an economist about what we're in for in terms of rate cuts in the next several months?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. We have seen that inflation has come back down, right? We have seen that we continue to see a labor market that is performing well for the American people. We continue to see jobs being added. However, there are signs of a little bit of things getting a little bit softer in the labor market. And certainly the Fed has a very important role to play there. But I do want to just really focus in on one thing you said about the difference between supply and demand. The Fed has a bucket of tools that they can use, and certainly they have their dual mandate to make sure that we keep unemployment low while also having price stability. But there is this really important role, and this way that we've seen over the past few years, this administration has been able to use the tools on the supply side to help get markets back in shape so that we could see those prices come down.
Well, you're typically bound from talking about the Fed because of this administration's stand on Fed independence. But I want to know how you feel about jawboning, because Donald Trump is doubling down on this idea that the president should be involved in setting monetary policy. And he told Bloomberg, I think it's fine for a president to talk. It doesn't mean they have to listen. And did tell us that he jawboned, to use his word, over interest rates with Chair Jay Powell. What's wrong with that?
So here's the thing. One of the things that we know is that having an independent Fed is really good for the economy. It's important that policymakers have that space to make those decisions, right? It's important that they are able to, to think about those long-term effects on the economy. I mean, we could talk for hours about the academic research that makes this case, not just here in the United States, but globally. And we've seen what happens when politicians get too involved in those decisions. And it's not good.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. Heather Boushey, thank you so much for joining us here in Chicago. It's great to have you. And of course, we still have a lot more ahead, as we're joined live next by Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland about his expectations for this night 2 of the Democratic National Convention and what he thinks about the down-ballot impact of the Harris candidacy this November. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The White House alone. Together, we must also elect strong Democratic majorities in the House and in the Senate so that we can deliver on an ambitious agenda for the people.
That was Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York last night at night 1 of the DNC, emphasizing the need for Democrats to win both chambers of Congress this November, in addition to the White House. Welcome back to our live broadcast from Chicago here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew, and we are now joined by one of AOC's colleagues in the House Democratic Caucus. Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland is here on set with us. Congressman, it's great to see you here in Chicago. Certainly, as we heard, along with the words of Congresswoman AOC last night, there's a lot of energy here, and that was certainly evident in the convention hall. The question is whether or not that energy can be sustained or whether Democrats risk falling into a trap of potentially complacency. What needs to be done to make sure that you don't just take for granted the momentum that is currently being seen, not just for Harris-Walz, but for other tickets down the ballot?
Well, I think we have to make sure we continue the energy and find ways to continue to push it forward. I really like the move of Harris-Walz going to the Milwaukee Arena today.
You like the counter-programming of their own convention?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of neat, actually. And, those are the things, it looks like they're having fun. It really does. It looks like it's a campaign of hope and joy. That's a good respite from what we'd had going about a month or two ago. The contrast with the Republicans is pretty stark. Trump looks off his game. I'll be charitable and say it that way. And I think we're continuing to make headway.
Joe Biden delivered the big speech last night, shed a tear up there. Some pretty special moments for him. Obviously, a very emotional experience to hear that standing ovation for 4 minutes. It was a very late night for him as well. But I'm struck as we sit here today with a couple of members of the Democratic House Conference that it was the House in the end that led him to his decision to leave the race, wasn't it? After that debate, the idea of potentially Democrats losing the House was the game-changing emotion that mobilized people like Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and others. It was your chamber, wasn't it?
Well, I make no secret of the fact that I was on the other side of that. I supported Biden. I thought he could win the election. But, it's water under the bridge at this point, and the transition's been beautifully executed. The way he announced that he wasn't going to run, then passed the baton immediately to Vice President Harris, and the way she's taken off with everybody's rallied behind her. The donors have up to $500 million now, something like that. And the volunteers, I think it's a real big advantage for us in these volunteer offices across the country, because Trump and the RNC chose to put their money towards his legal fees, whereas Biden and Harris have put the money in the ground game. And so I think we can really make some hay in these battleground states on that front alone.
Well, certainly your leadership in the House is sounding a little bit more enthusiastic, perhaps, about the prospects. We got to speak with one of them, the whip of the House minority, Congresswoman Katherine Clark of Massachusetts, joined us earlier about potentially claiming that majority.
I have always been bullish on the Democrats retaking the House, because what we've seen are do nothing at best and real extremism that the American people are rejecting. And so what we're seeing is this incredible energy and momentum that we are going to turn into action.
But even before we saw this ticket turnover, if you will, Congressman, we knew there were likely better odds of the House turning Democrat than the Senate staying so, as Republicans see a number of pickup opportunities, not just potentially in Ohio and Montana, where obviously things are very vulnerable, but they think they have a shot in your state of Maryland. And their candidate, Larry Hogan, who's up against Angela Alsobrooks, who has a speaking slot tonight on night 2 of the DNC.
I'm trying not to laugh. Hogan's ads, I was joking about this the other day. He's actually running campaign
He was a
ads.
very popular governor.
Very popular governor pre-Dobbs, right? So he was able to duck the Roe v. Wade issue when he ran for governor twice. He can't duck it now, but he's trying hard. So his campaign ad theme is people before politics, or people over politics. Guess whose line that is? Hakeem Jeffries in the House Democrats. He's running as a light blue Democrat, I guess, but I don't think people are going to be fooled by Democrat light. They're going to see through it. I think some of them will actually be offended by it, because he's treating them like they're stupid. And I think that's not a smart campaign strategy.
So you think Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket gets Angela Alsobrooks elected? Could that be a sweep of the House and Senate that would allow you to get funding for the Key Bridge in Baltimore? Is that required to get the funding for the Key?
Well, let me walk through that. Yeah. I think Angela would have won regardless of, you could have a dog catcher at the top of the ticket. Angela Alsobrooks is going to be Larry Hogan.
Early to endorse.
Yeah. And I think, Kamala Harris is going to win the presidency. Key Bridge, though, if Trump wins it, I think it's at risk. I think FBI headquarters, which has been placed in my district, could be at risk. I think a lot of major projects like that could be at risk.
You just live without a bridge in that world?
I don't know what he would do, but nobody makes money predicting what Donald Trump's going to do. And we certainly don't want to, as a country, rely on having to count on Donald Trump to come through for us.
Well, you may not be able to predict what he will do. You might also not be able to predict what happened to him. Certainly no one really predicted the attempted assassination that happened on the eve of the Republican convention last month. You, of course, are serving on the task force investigating that. How has your work come along thus far, knowing you've been on recess for weeks now. Is that work ongoing? Have you unveiled new information? What can you share with us?
Yeah, it's getting underway. You're right, though. Being in recess makes it harder for us to get together because we're not in Washington. We're scattered across the country. But we've had some virtual meetings and conference calls and the like. Staff has been hired. I think they're pretty much all done at this point. We've sent letters to get the documents from the Secret Service and the FBI. Other committees had collected some documents, too. We're pulling those together. We're now starting to line up the transcribed interviews. In short, we're getting the investigation underway, I think, as quickly as possible. And I'm proud to say that it's moving forward in a bipartisan way so far. A
pretty important moment for that committee, considering the element of political violence right now in this country. And we'd love to stay in touch with you on that back in Washington. It's good to see you again, sir, here in Chicago. Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey of Maryland, we thank you for being with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, our conversation with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan, as well Arne Duncan, the former U.S. Secretary of Education in the Obama administration. Part of our conversation ahead on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, broadcasting live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And as we do so, the Real Clear Politics polling average for the swing state of Michigan has Vice President Kamala Harris 2 points ahead of Donald Trump. That's a role reversal from where President Biden was in the race before he dropped out. He was 2 points behind Trump. Earlier today, we spoke with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan, and we started by asking her how Democrats can keep up their momentum and energy. Here's that conversation.
Look, I'm absolutely feeling the pitch level, energy, the enthusiasm. This is a really historic, can't believe it's only day 2 convention. And yet I'm in Michigan, and I know that the election's tight. It's close, and we got a lot of work to do, and we've got to be honest with ourselves about it. And so we're digging deep. And one of the things that you see the Harris-Walz campaign doing, not taking a thing for granted. Keeping the infrastructure in place. All the offices that we opened up under Biden are now the Harris-Walz offices. They're her offices. And they're volunteers that have, of course, stayed on board, and new volunteers that are coming on board. And we're going to be digging deep for those independent, undecided voters. We certainly know that there's a few of them, and that's to be expected because she's introducing herself to people. And Thursday is going to be quite resounding for that.
Well, I'm sure it's not lost on you that Donald Trump is in your home state. He's in Howell, Michigan today, which I'm sure is a beautiful place. He's talking about crime, as a matter of fact, not auto workers. But there's a really interesting series of moments last night with union leaders on the stage, including Shawn Fain, who you've worked very closely with, running the United Auto Workers. He stood on stage, Congresswoman, to show off his T-shirt that says, "Donald Trump is a scab." Is that the kind of rhetoric that wins this election?
Well, I certainly think that the UAW is taking a very creative and almost newfound approach to organizing for this election. They've got a campaign going where they're going into neighborhoods, into their union halls. They've got a much more coordinated approach than we've ever seen. They did Zooms kicking off UAW Women for Harris, as an example, different segments around the country. And I'm really proud of what the UAW is doing. And I'm also recognizing that Shawn Fain's going to call it like it is. I mean, he's in the trenches right now in terms of organizing new plants, focusing on worker profits, not just corporate profits, worker profits, what's going into people's pocketbooks when, yes, the costs of homes and the cost of everyday goods are sort of through the roof. And just a note on Howell, by the way, the last time that Trump and Vance were in town, there was a group of neo-Nazis cheering on Trump in Howell, Michigan. Wow. So I hope to see him denouncing that during his visit.
Well, I guess we'll see if that is replicated in any way today. On this notion of the reach out to unions, though, it was noteworthy in President Biden's speech last night. He, as he's done in the past, declared himself to be the most union president in history. Someone shouted Union Joe at him, and he was like, "That's right, man, that's right." Really claiming that title for his own, at the same time trying to advocate for a new president to come in. Do you think Joe Biden would say honestly, can you say honestly that Kamala Harris will be just as union friendly as he is? Can she be more so, possibly?
Well, a tidbit about the person who shouted to the president, Union Joe, and started the chant, that was Eli Izagari from Ferndale, Michigan, in my district.
All right, so you've got the inside information.
He's the political director of the Carpenters Union. And then right after the chant, everyone said, good job, Eli. Look, there's no doubt that there is something really special about President Biden and his relationship with working Americans and our unions. I will never forget being at the infrastructure bill signing. You know, look, we're still making our way through COVID-19. It was November of 21. He has row after row of rank and file union members present. Come one, come all. That's who he is in his bones. Kamala Harris comes to Michigan. She talks about manufacturing. She talks about working class roots that she has, working, fast food to pay her way through college, no silver spoon, sheer talent, American talent on the stage. That's what we have, not only with Kamala Harris, but also with Tim Walz. Just an everyday person who put up his hand, I relate to this, to run for Congress and make a difference. And now he's going to be our next vice president.
Well, then why not reach out to the Teamsters? It's been noteworthy. Sean O'Brien spoke at the Republican National Convention, was very upset following the convention over some words that Donald Trump made to Elon Musk in this interview that we did about union workers. He was calling him the greatest cutter and celebrating the idea of firing workers who try to organize. Sean O'Brien asked to be an invited speaker at this Democratic National Convention. As Axios puts it, he was ghosted. Should the Democratic Party reach out to him now? You can still add him this week.
Look, Kevin Moore, who runs the Teamsters Union in Michigan, good friend of mine, a lot of energy. He was Joe Biden's top supporter. A lot of Teamsters love in Michigan. In terms of what's going on with the union nationally, I'm going to plead the fifth, because I don't know what led to that decision. I've been working really closely for years with the Teamsters. In fact, that was the only union to endorse me in my first run for Congress in a major Democratic primary. They kind of picked me out and said, hey, we think you're going to be the one who's going to be able to do this and carry it all the way through. So I have a very deep relationship with them. And I've also seen this issue regarding Sean O'Brien's presence really bounce around. And it's unfortunate, because what did Biden get done? What did Biden-Harris get done? She was a tie-break vote on this. The Butch-Lewis pension bill, saving the pensions of the Teamsters, the multi-employer pensions, an overdue deal from the Great Recession. We should be celebrating that. We should be celebrating that at this convention. And it does appear that a relationship is broken down. And maybe that's because running into the arms of Donald Trump, who's just continued to sail union workers and, frankly, American infrastructure down the river for the 4 years he was president, wasn't the right move.
Well, as you talk about the work that this Congress has done in conjunction with this administration, you, of course, have done many things, including co-chairing the Hostage Caucus.
Yeah.
And we've had some interesting developments while we've been here in Chicago related to a potential ceasefire deal in which hostages would presumably be involved between Israel and Hamas. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, announced yesterday Netanyahu's government, Israel, has agreed to a so-called bridge ceasefire agreement. Mm-hmm. We're waiting as to whether or not Hamas is actually going to come to these terms. Did Blinken get ahead of himself? Do you have any insight into the actual status of these conversations and whether we're actually about to see a deal get done?
I don't think he did. I think that this is a very fraught situation with a non-state actor who we are trying to negotiate with. You mentioned my work on hostage affairs in the Congress, hostage and wrongful detentions. And look, when you're dealing with a non-state actor, the Red Cross doesn't even have access to these hostages. With Paul Whelan, when he was in Russia, he could talk to his parents almost as much as he wanted. He had consular access. It was no picnic, but it was a different situation because Russia is a state actor, unlike Hamas. And I want to say I'm so proud of this White House. I really am. Every time I've interfaced with them, and you saw this in President Biden's speech last night, eye on the prize, 5 months left to continue to work and deliver. I was actually over at the White House. I was talking with them it just happened to be the day Paul Whelan was returned. What was on everyone's mind, though? The next thing. We got to get a ceasefire. So they are really pushing to get that done. I don't think they're trying to rush it, but this is part of kind of that exertion of power that we want to put into a situation. You know, maybe there's some diplomacy. Blinken's been over there, you know, almost a dozen times. It feels like obviously President Netanyahu came, or Prime Minister Netanyahu came here, you know, little touch and go in terms of what happened in the aftermath of that. To see agreement, though, is a big deal.
You can find the full conversation with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan on the terminal or online. Now, tonight at the DNC, one of the most anticipated speakers, of course, the headliner, former President Barack Obama, who has been vocal about his support for Kamala Harris. And joining us live here in Chicago is Arne Duncan, the former Secretary of Education in the Obama administration. Mr. Secretary, great to see you.
Thanks for
nice to meet you in your hometown here for a conversation. It's a real pleasure. So this is a big moment tonight. This is kind of a page turner, as we've been saying, from Joe Biden to your old friend and boss. And people should know that you didn't just work for Barack Obama. You guys have been good friends since the early 90s. You bonded over basketball, and you know him better than most people will ever talk to. Is he going to be the most effective surrogate for Joe Biden?
I don't know if he'll be the most effective. He'll be obviously extraordinarily effective. And that emotion between them, I got to witness that friendship for 7 years, to see how close they were, to see the mutual respect, to see how much they support each other. Can't wait to see how much President Obama tried to do for, at that point, Vice President Biden when he was dealing with a very serious illness and then death of his son, Beau. Those things bond you in ways that it's hard for people to really understand. So I'm looking forward to tonight, and it will be, I think it'll be emotional.
Well, especially because we know that there has been some tension in the relationship, despite the ways in which they worked together for 2 terms. He did play somewhat of a role, according to reports, in pushing Biden out and making way for Kamala Harris. Do you expect he'll allude to that at all?
I don't know if he played a role there or not. What I do know is it's one team here. It's one family. His respect for President Biden, his respect for Vice President Harris couldn't be higher. The goal here is to win. We have a fantastic chance to win and to really help to preserve our democracy. And so I just think everybody's excited to be part of something that has a chance to really make history and preserve our democracy.
He was on the attack against Donald Trump at the last Democratic convention 4 years ago. Is that the role that he will play to free up Kamala Harris? Because Barack Obama and Donald Trump have a special relationship, don't they?
I don't know, again, whether he'll be the attack dog
you guys
or not.
don't talk about this over a beer?
I don't know if he needs to. The contrast is so clear here for the American public. People, it's 2 very clear choices. You got a, aging convicted felon who's angry and, trying to, figure out the past and continue to debate that. And you got someone with a lot of joy looking to move forward. And for me, the thing that hit last night was just the vibe, the positivity. And I think that's what the American people want. So for me, I don't know if anyone needs to be the attack dog. Let's just let the American public see the difference between these 2 candidates. One a convicted felon, the other a former prosecutor. Let them decide what they want to, who they think should lead the country forward.
Well, let's talk about their differences on an issue you know quite well as well. Education. This is something that actually came up when Donald Trump joined Elon Musk for an interview or conversation, however you want to call it, on X earlier this month about his plans for the Board of Education if he were to be elected. This is what he said.
We spend more per pupil than any other country in the world. So we spend more. And what I'm going to do, one of the first acts, and this is where I need an Elon Musk. I need somebody that has a lot of strength and courage and smarts. I want to close up Department of Education, move education back to the states, where states like Iowa, where states like Idaho, not every state will do great.
What would happen to education in America if that happened?
Well, I always say education should be the ultimate nonpartisan or bipartisan issue. We should be all in this together to have the best educated nation in the world. I say that a great military is our best defense, but a great education system is our best offense. And to somehow think we should just delegate that to everybody, that is not an important, critically important federal role. Former President Trump rarely tells the truth, but I never forget he once said, "I love the uneducated." And the uneducated are more easily manipulated. And for him to really do whatever he can to not push higher education, to not push more early childhood education, to not pay teachers better and attract and retain great talent to our classrooms, he has no interest in any of that. keeping people uneducated is actually very much part of President Trump's agenda.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, he's been talking a lot about your hometown lately and has been doing this for years, actually, comparing Chicago most recently to Afghanistan and citing 117 shootings in his news conference on the 4th of July. This campaign is trying to make crime a major issue here. The Trump campaign, he and J.D. Vance are both holding events about crime today and pointing to Chicago. And I talked about it earlier when we both sat down earlier today with Danny Wirtz. I bet you know pretty well, Chair and CEO of the Chicago Blackhawks. This is what he had to say, and we'll have you respond.
Crime has always been something that we've had to contend with and work with, but we also know that when we invest in the neighborhoods and when you invest in economic development, that is one way to help create opportunities that gets to sort of the root cause of some of the crime issues you see today. So I think Chicago has a history of really rolling up our sleeves and trying to be part of the solution.
How would you respond to that yourself, the issue of crime in the city and the image that Donald Trump is presenting?
It's an issue in every city. And I spent the last 8 years of my life here in Chicago working to reduce gun violence. So this is very, very personal. We've come a long way. We have a hell of a long way to go. And we should all be in this together. Violence is too high in Chicago. It's gone down significantly, but it's still too high. It's too high in, probably almost every other major urban district, urban city in America. And we should be all in this together. And I do agree, our program is called Chicago Cred, Create Real Economic Destiny. I always say I'm trying to solve an economic problem, not a crime problem, where we can provide jobs, where we can create concrete hope, we can give people an alternative to the streets and a reason to put down the guns. I get to see that miraculous transformation every single day. That's the joy in the work I'm fortunate to do, privileged to do here in my hometown of Chicago.
And of course, Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, was a founder. He still supports Everytown for gun safety, which advocates for gun safety measures. Are you hoping to see some of that advocacy at the convention this week? Are there policy initiatives you'd like to see talked about, put forward, aimed at gun violence, not just here in Chicago, but across the country?
Well, this is a national issue, and for me, it's a lot like COVID. It travels through social networks. I'm not safe if my neighbors aren't safe. And you actually heard President Biden talk about it, I thought, very eloquently last night. Yeah. Assault weapons, those are good for wars and foreign soil, but who needs why is that needed here? That has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. And so there are lots of common sense things that we can do to make our communities, our schools, our churches, our synagogues safer. Democrats, frankly, are way ahead on that issue. Republicans have been in the pocket of the NRA, and that's led to a level of loss and heartbreak and destruction that is morally unfathomable to me. I can't understand how they can live with themselves knowing the risk and the fear that children across this country live with every single day because we as adults fail to do what other nations do just to keep our children safe and to let our kids be kids.
All right, Mr. Secretary, it's a pleasure to have you here with us in Chicago. Arne Duncan, of course, former U.S. Secretary of Education under the Obama administration. We appreciate your time, sir. And still ahead, we'll be joined by our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, as we look ahead to tonight's action from the United Center here in Chicago. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Freedom from control. Freedom from extremism and fear.
Extremists want to take us back, but we are not going back.
We go forward. That's American. And we need a leader who is for the people.
Ours is a fight for the future.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. We are live from Chicago on night 2 of the Democratic National Convention, set to gavel in the next hour. We'll be hearing tonight from both Barack and Michelle Obama, as we've been telling you, a slew of other Democratic luminaries. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Chicago. Night 2 here with our signature panel as well. Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, political science professor at Iona University, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. It's great to see you both here. It's time to go again. This is going to be underway, as we mentioned, not long from now. The big headliner tonight, Barack Obama, but there are going to be a lot of others speaking as well. Jeannie, as the party tries to turn the page from last night. This is almost the real start of the convention, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, last night was really about Joe Biden taking a bow, talking about his legacy. I could have used for a little bit more Kamala Harris, but, you know, you can't begrudge the guy his time.
Did make an appearance?
She made an appearance. And tonight we understand Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, two of the biggest stars in the party, are going to be focused like a laser beam on what Kamala Harris brings to the ticket and also what Democrats need to do going forward. I mean, this is something they want to make sure that they lay out. We have 77 days left. This is not going to be a cakewalk. There is a tight campaign, and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, but the strategy that they have in mind as to what she needs to do, which is in part why she's going to be in Wisconsin tonight. They don't want to repeat Hillary Clinton in 2016, staying away from Wisconsin.
Well, I'm so glad you raised that, Jeannie, because as the Obamas, two of the most popular figures in Democratic politics, and her very own husband, are taking the stage or getting ready to in the convention hall. She's going to be in the Pfizer Forum where the RNC was, not where the DNC is now. Is this a smart strategy? Yes, it is a swing state, to Jeannie's point.
Yeah, normally the candidate wouldn't be in the hall tonight. It's kind of unusual. I guess Donald Trump loved to go every night.
Maybe reset our expectations.
He didn't want to watch TV.
Bit.
Yeah, he changed expectations. In the past, it's not been traditional. And so rather than sitting in her suite and watching it on television, she's making good use of her time. Think of it as a remote from the convention. And it just happens to be a remote with 18,000 people in it. And I think it is good. The more time she spends dominating the media in key swing states like this, and Milwaukee itself is really the heartbeat of an election victory for her in Wisconsin. She's got to do well there. I think that it's probably a good use of time. It's expensive. I mean, watching a convention from, you know, a major coliseum with 18,000 people, it isn't cheap. It's not like just flicking the switch.
Well, that's right. So maybe we get extra coverage tonight, or they cross over each other, split screen coverage. We're curious to see how this all plays out and why exactly they made that decision to go for it here, Jeannie. But last night it was all about, you know, when is this going to end? This thing went completely off the rails in terms of run of show. Several speakers were canceled. James Taylor was canceled. I still feel like they find room for him at some point. Do regular people care about this? How many Americans are going to be watching this live tonight? We knew, what, 20 million last night, according to Nielsen? But most people get this stuff chopped up on social media after the fact. Does it matter?
They do. And I do think it matters. One of the interesting things, the RNC and now the DNC, the influencers, the social media, I understand they have 200 of them. Or I think they had 200 passes. We had one influencer talk last night, you know, on the stage. These are people that reach 24+ million folks. So you're right. And not everybody's going to be watching it live. I know I have kids and they don't turn on TVs like we used to in the day, but they all watch it, a lot of them on TikTok. And so it is going to be important. And I suspect when we see that watch party from Milwaukee, one thing we're going to get are some of these, you know, pieces of her, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, Tim Walz watching the party.
Yes, right.
You know, so that the millennials and the Gen Zers can feel like they're a part of this. So they are trying to reach people, but it's not going to be the traditional live television is the primary way.
But Democrats can now say they threw their convention in a swing state.
Well, there you go. I want to talk about another swing state, too, while we're at it. One in the Sun Belt, North Carolina. We saw in the New York Times Siena poll that came out on the weekend eve of the convention that she is polling ahead of Trump in that state. Now, Sabatos crystal ball at the University of Virginia Center for Politics has, for the first time this cycle, moved electoral votes away from the Republican column into the toss-up column. And the state they're doing so for is North Carolina. Rick, if you're the Trump campaign, what are you thinking when you see that?
I'd be buying more TV time in Charlotte. Yeah, look, I mean, it was only a month away that we thought a state like North Carolina was wrapped up. But then again, it was a month before that when we thought states like Virginia would be in play for Republicans. And so this is a ever-moving dynamic. I mean, I've never seen the swings in momentum this quickly that I've seen in this election cycle. So it's too early to tell whether there's a real decisive thing. But just for the Democrats to be able to then force Republicans to have to start buying media, I noticed that Elon Musk's super PAC is actually going to do the ground game in North Carolina. So Trump's campaign isn't going to be charged with a foul and say, now you got to go hire a bunch of door knockers, but it's going to be done by Elon Musk. And so there's going to be a real campaign in North Carolina. As Jeannie said, 77 days is a flash in the pan when it comes to politics. And so, welcome to another swing state that's really a battleground state for now.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature political panel, here with us in Chicago, not in a swing state of Illinois. Thank you so much. Now, we want to quickly mention some breaking news. A federal judge in Texas ruling that the U.S. Federal Trade Commission can't enforce its near total ban on non-compete agreements because the agency lacks the authority to enact the rule. The judge sided with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a Texas-based tax firm that sued to block the rule, writing in her decision that the FTC's rule is, quote, unreasonably overboard without reasonable explanation. The judge had previously delayed implementation of the ban, which was scheduled to take effect on September 4th. We'll be back from Chicago in just a few minutes here on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, broadcasting live from Chicago, the scene of the Democratic National Convention, which, of course, is going to kick off night 2 just about 35 minutes from now. Former President Barack Obama will be headlining the proceedings tonight. He will also be speaking just after his wife, the former First Lady Michelle Obama. We'll hear from the second gentleman of the United States and husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, Doug Emhoff, as well. But others on the list include the governor of Illinois, the state where you're in now, J.B. Pritzker. Even the Senate Majority Leader will be speaking.
Well, also a former Trump White House official, which is going to be an interesting moment tonight. You might remember the name Stephanie Grisham, former press secretary straddling 2019 and 2020, could have some interesting things to say about her experience as all of this leads us to Kamala Harris accepting her party's nomination on Thursday night. The one I'm going to be watching, too, is Senator Bernie Sanders. With so many, so many Republicans criticizing Kamala Harris as being, quote, dangerously liberal. What is the independent senator going to bring to the stage tonight?
Well, especially considering he, along with her, were in a competitive Democratic primary against then former Vice President Joe Biden before he was President Biden in the last cycle. And in that primary, we saw Harris get pulled farther to the left. That's where she made many of the stances, whether it be around fracking or health care, that Republicans are now attacking her for. So does his presence suggest there is that leftward pull again, or is that something she'll be able to resist?
Yep. God, these are great questions, and there are reasons why some of these happen on the first couple of nights. 20 million, according to Nielsen, on night 1 for Joe Biden's speech. We'll keep tabs on viewership. Of course, tomorrow's headliner, presumptive vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, and we'll have great guests on both the early and late editions of Balance of Power, Kaylee.
Indeed, we'll be joined by San Francisco Mayor London Breed, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida, and former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. Will have a stacked several hours for you. Again, 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time and 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Chicago.